Most of the isolation we do for the catalogs is merely clicking around with the magic wand and running the edge modification action that fills the background with white. That is entirely possible as long as photographers can provide decent images. So if you work in a badly organized place where they shoot white stuff on gray and the background is always dirty and there are huge dark shadows everywhere, don't expect any magic. If you wonder whether this would work on your images, ask yourself, can I isolate this with the magic wand and edge modification isolating action? If the answer is no, then no, automatic isolation won't work for you. It means that you can't automatically isolate objects that blend with the background or objects made of fur, and you also can't do it if your images are too small, as in low res. As for the rest, keep on watching, and I'll show you all we can do. If you have an object that is contrasted with the background, and the edges of the object are smooth, you can be pretty sure that the automatic isolation will work well. There are two actions in the automatic isolation set. The first one is called auto-isolation and it doesn't require you to do anything. Just run it and you'll get your object isolated in a few seconds. When it finishes its work, it runs the isolation checking script that turns the image black where it's not isolated for a second and then reverts back to the isolated state. This is necessary for the visual control of isolation so that you can immediately see if it went fine or not, if there's some trash on the background left, or if the object is damaged. But in this case it's absolutely great. What's not great is the time it took to run the action. That's because the image is huge, it's almost 5500 pixels wide, and it's not cropped. The action will do its work faster on cropped images because it will have less work to do. So it's a good idea to help it by working with cropped images, cropped as close to the object as possible. It might work up to 2 times faster, which is quite an improvement. If you want to save time, crop your images in camera raw before isolating them. When the isolation's done, all that's left is to restore the shadow, which I'll do automatically with the action we have already discussed. It's evident that the automatic isolation action is not able to get rid of dark shadows under the objects, so if you're isolating without a shadow, photographers might as well shoot images without one, or at least without dark shadows in the first place. To be isolated automatically, the object doesn't have to be dark, it just has to be contrasted with the background. If you haven't cropped the image, you can make a rectangular selection around the object really quick, and the action will ignore the rest of the image. When it's done, restore the shadow and pat yourself on the back. The automatic isolation action is not able to click anywhere within the object, just around it. If there is no selection in the image, it clicks around image edges. If there is a selection, it clicks around the selection boundaries. But it doesn't click inside the bag's handle, and that's why this area won't be isolated. To isolate the bag properly, you have to do this. Make a rectangular selection around the bag, or just select all if the image is cropped already. Then use the magic wand and click it in the handle area while holding Alt to subtract it from the selection. Then run the action and it will isolate the handle area as well. If the item is white or light gray, but it's not blending with the background, you can still use the automatic action and isolate it with no problem at all. As you can see, this area on top of the object, which is really bright, has not been eaten away, it's still there untouched. Same with thin items. If an object is thin, it doesn't mean that the automatic isolation will eat it. It only happens with fur, so you can use it to isolate things like this as well. You might wonder why there's a second action in the same set and when we're going to start use it. Well, it's about time. Sometimes automatic isolation won't be working properly. This shoe is black, but it has a white area on the sole that is really blending with the background. If you try automatic action on it, it will eat away the sole. This is exactly the time you'd want to use the other action from the pack that is called Auto-Isolation Threshold. Unlike its fully independent neighbor, this action will give you a threshold prompt where you have to find such a setting that the edge of the object will have no holes and tears in it. So I'll zoom in on the sole where it blends with the background for a better view and run the action. When the threshold window appears, I'll change the default number, which is 250, to 251, but that's not enough. Then I'll increase it again to 252. The tear has now closed, but some weird artifacts have appeared on the background. This is not a problem. After pressing enter, the action will finish its work and you'll get the image isolated. Now the sole looks fine. Same as before, the automatic action eats this small transparent plastic thingy. But run the threshold version and set the threshold to 252 and it will be fine. There will be more trash on the background because the action is not able to select it anymore, not when you demand it to be more careful with the edges, but the isolation is still very decent. Erase the trash and restore the shadow and that's it. Sometimes the fully automatic action will refuse to work for no apparent reason. This shoe is very dark and contrasted with the background, but still the action eats the sole almost completely. This is not a mistake of some sort, this is pretty much inevitable. The action works with edges, no matter how dark or light the object is. This is exactly what lets the action isolate objects so efficiently. But this shoe has problematic edges here where the sole blends with the shadow. I'll use the Find Edges filter to demonstrate the idea. Here, in this spot, there is no definite edge, so when the action clicks with the magic wand, it will select the sole as well. So if something like this happens, just run the other action. 251 in the threshold prompt is enough to make the isolation correct. There's a limit to how much you can increase the threshold settings though. There's no magic in Photoshop, only math. You can't really go higher than 253. At 254, the background will be filled with trash and artifacts and it will render the isolation useless. So if you try 253 and it doesn't do any good, the image cannot be isolated automatically. Use other methods. The reason why the action was not able to isolate the previous image is obvious, because the edges were not definite enough. But in this case, you can still get a good result with the threshold action set to 253. Now there's a lot of trash in the lower right corner, but removing it is much faster than tracing the boots with the pen tool, so it's reasonable to try the automatic approach, even if the image looks as if it's not going to work. The threshold setting can also be decreased, and it might make your life better. Some items can hardly be isolated with the magic wand, like these gloves here. This edge is really fuzzy and the magic wand can't get through. If you try the fully automatic action, it will leave you with a dirty border around the edge. But if I run the threshold action and start decreasing the value, you'll see that this fuzzy edge gets diminished, and at 190, it will no longer be fuzzy. It's not very smooth either, but it doesn't have to when it's made of such a hairy material. After aligning and resizing, the gloves look pretty normal. But don't get carried away when decreasing the threshold value. At 180, the action will destroy one of the gloves. You have to make sure that the object edge is not torn, or it won't work. The same approach can be used to eliminate deep shadows around an object, if the object is dark and contrasted with the background. If I use the fully automatic action, the flower will be surrounded with the shadowy pieces of background. This is not such a good result, but if I run the threshold action and set it to, let's say, 215, it will be much better, especially after resizing and aligning. So, if your object is very contrasted with the background, you can decrease the threshold value in the action prompt and get rid of nasty shadows or other things like that. Here I can go as low as 190 and remove the plastic fixture completely. Just make sure you don't tear the edge. It takes some practice with the threshold to get the hang of it, but it's not rocket science. All you have to do is test different values on different images and see the result. The automatic isolation actions can also be used on images like this one, where the background is not really consistent. This image is just horrible and it looks like you'd need the pen tool to isolate it. But I'll select the areas within the earrings manually and invert the selection and then run the threshold action. I'll set the threshold to 241 and look, after restoring the shadow, it looks pretty decent for something that took a few seconds. The top of the earrings was not isolated properly. I'll have to do it manually, but the rest of the image is absolutely fine. Even if you can't get a perfect result, the automatic actions can still save you quite some time.